Okay, so the topics that I want to cover today for biology, I have three main ones, and we're going to start with the competitive exclusion principle, which is this basic concept about how two species cannot coexist in the same type of ecological niche, which is a term that I will return to later. So they cannot coexist if they are competing for the same amount of resources. To demonstrate this principle, I brought in figures here. I have a picture of phytoplankton and algae. This would be a producer in the ecosystem because they are at the bottom, they make food, whereas we have primary consumers, which would be these two. We have zebra mussels and quagga mussels. These would be the ones that eat the plankton and the algae. Now, say if the phytoplankton and algae begin to rapidly reproduce and create a lot more products and offspring, then the mussels will want to begin to eat these a lot more, and they're going to eat at higher rates than they usually do throughout the day. But eventually, they're going to have to start competing and fighting for these resources. So naturally, for example, let's say that the zebra mussels, their population is going to increase over time if they are able to get more food. And the quagga mussels, their population is going to decrease, and there's going to be some sort of imbalance between these two species because they cannot coexist together. Now going back to the term ecological niche, this is basically wherever an organism fits into their ecosystem. It's kind of the role that they play in order to help contribute and keep the ecosystem in balance. If we want to define what an ecosystem is, this is a community of living organisms and how they interact with the abiotic or the non-living organisms within this environment as a whole. So I have an example of an ecosystem here. This is a deciduous forest found in many different parts of the United States, mostly I would say like the Midwest or the West Coast. Now, within the forest, we have lots of biotic factors. The deer, we have many different species of birds and chipmunks as well. The trees would also count as biotic factors as they are living and they help the organisms breathe and survive. But an example of abiotic would be the sunlight if it is shining in the forest that day. There is also a river towards the back where a beaver has built a dam. So that's another abiotic factor. Now, as far as another term that we could learn is biomagnification, which is any kind of outside source that comes and disturbs the ecosystem as a whole, and it affects just kind of like the food web that all of these animals fall under. This is not the same ecosystem. This is a different example of what a food web would look like. Producers and all the consumers. Obviously, there's always an apex predator as well, which is usually at the top. Could be any of these three animals, the fox, the owl, or the snake. Now, I would say if some kind of toxic element, such as copper, came into this ecosystem and somehow got into the nutrients or the soil, this would greatly affect everybody within this ecosystem because the fungi or any kind of other nutrients will absorb this toxic material, and all of the consumers will begin to absorb the copper as well. The apex is going to be the one that is affected the most because they are injecting all of this toxins from previous animals. This will make a great impact on the ecosystem and the food web, and there could possibly be a new tertiary consumer in the future if the copper continues to spread. The last topic that I want to address is the difference between resistance and resilience. Now, the main difference between these two terms is that resistance is the ability for an ecosystem to remain at equilibrium after some kind of disturbance has occurred, whether it's a natural disturbance, such as a fire, or a human disturbance, such as pollution or deforestation. And then resilience is how an ecosystem naturally returns to equilibrium after it is disturbed. Now, we can put a scenario in for this term. If we have a species of bird that eats away at insects, maybe on a tree, on the bark of a tree, we can go back to our forest example here. If there's a bird that eats at the insects affecting the tree, there might be only one type of species here that eats the insects. Therefore, if they start to decrease in population, this is greatly going to affect the trees because they're not going to have anyone to eat the insects for them, and their population is going to decrease as well. Therefore, it is always better for ecosystems to have a higher rate of biodiversity because that allows them to become more stable whenever they face some kind of disturbance. So it's really great to have a variety of species of birds that can eat away at these insects so they don't have to worry about losing one type of bird at such a high or like a quick rate of time, which is very helpful. That's all we're going to cover today. For the competitive exclusion principle, we covered question number 27, which was the mussels example. For ecological niches and ecosystems, we covered questions 6, 9, and 28. And finally, for resistance and resilience, that was question number 40. Thank you so much for listening.